I don't think of myself as disabled. I have limits, but we all have limits. And like anyone else, I also have many talents.
Oscar Pistorius is going to win it. He's storming down the last 100 metres. It could be a great time. Will it be a world record?
Part man, part machine. Oscar Pistorius looked like he'd stepped out of the future. Like some mythical Superman, Oscar conquered the world at the Olympics.
Oscar Pistorius from South Africa, 44, 45, kisses the South Africa badge.
Fortune smiled on the young superhero. And then the wheel turned. Four gunshots in the heat of the African night would change Oscar's destiny forever.
I had a phone call at 7:30 that morning, and the man said to me, "Do you have a daughter?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Reeva?" I said, "Yes." He said, "There's been an accident and she's been shot." And then the man said, "She's dead."
I was actually on my way to the track to work my horses in the early hours of the morning. And I received a phone call from my wife. And she told me the details of what had happened, and I just stopped my car and burst into tears. Because of the way I feel about him, it was like as if it was one of my own children.
4 shots. 2 lives dramatically overturned in an instant. Oscar has been charged with murder. The state's indictment says that Oscar did unlawfully and intentionally kill a person, to wit, Reeva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old female. Oscar says he made a tragic mistake. He thought he was firing on an intruder in his house. He was trying to protect Reeva. But is Oscar telling the truth? That's the key question at his trial. That's the only question.
The entire trial will be fought on one issue: intention. What was going through his mind at the time he fired those shots? If his intention was, I want to kill you, then he's guilty of murder. If his honest belief was, there is an intruder in my home and I'm justified in protecting myself and my girlfriend, then he would escape liability.
The prosecution is certain Oscar intended to kill. They want him convicted for murder, even if he thought he was firing on a burglar. Even then, says the state's indictment, the accused shot with the direct intention to kill a person. An error in persona will not affect the intention to kill a human being. The indictment also charges Oscar with unlawful possession of ammunition, some .38 caliber rounds, for which he has no licensed firearm. Oscar's destiny lies in his own hands and in his words. He could have remained silent. He could have said nothing about the events of Valentine's Day. He could have made the world wait. Instead, Oscar wanted bail, and to get that, he chose to explain what had happened. His explanation came in a sworn affidavit.
And this is a way to obtain the version of the defense under oath in advance of the trial, because it binds the accused. And our law now permits the record of the bail proceedings to be admitted at the trial of the matter.
Obviously, you are very careful in what you say during such a bail application because you have a right to remain silent.
A young woman died violently. The man who killed her was her lover. Her life was cut tragically short. Now, his future hangs in the balance. Oscar's explanation of what happened in his home needs to be tested. Did Oscar Pistorius murder his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day? Or was it a case of mistaken identity? Oscar says he believed he was firing on an intruder and was trying to protect Reeva. To test his claims, some of the best legal minds in the nation are gathering and laying their plans. The defense must prove Oscar's telling the truth, that he made an honest mistake. Barry Rue has that crucial but formidable task.
It may very well be, once we get access, to realize we need to appoint new experts.
And over 3 decades of experience to help him.
We simply don't know what's in the state's army.
The prosecution says Oscar deliberately intended to kill. The charge is that he intended to kill Reeva, but at the very least, they're sure he intended to kill a human being. They must prove Oscar's account is a lie. Helene L. has a fearsome reputation for exposing deception.
We will see some dramatic exchanges by the lawyers, detailed cross-examination. It'll be absolutely riveting, and it will be worth watching. Innocence or guilt can hang on a tiny detail.
Premeditated murder is the most serious charge against an individual. No justice system in the world takes it lightly. Prosecutors know if they're successful, they'll be condemning the accused to a life of suffering. In In Oscar's case, that could be a minimum of 25 years in jail. And of course, the immediate loss of his international status. Because the punishment for premeditated murder is so very severe, it's an extremely difficult charge to prove.
I think at the outside, the state would be trying to say that once the victim took refuge behind the door, that there was a cold, calculated decision to kill her, and is trying to say that that is premeditated. It's a stretch, in my view.
I am personally of the opinion that it can never be premeditated murder. Under those circumstances, there must be, in my opinion, an extent and a degree of planning.
However traumatic the consequences for the accused, it's the state's duty to ensure justice is served. That's why the court must be impartial and moderating. And all accused are entitled to the very best defense they can get. Oscar claims he was in a panic and made a terrible mistake. That's his defense. The prosecution claims that's a lie. They find many aspects of Oscar's affidavit improbable. So, they're picking apart his version of events.
The state has to prove that Oscar intentionally, unlawfully killed another person. Now, the intention is two factors, that his aim and object was to cause the death of the person, but he must also have known that what he was doing at the time was wrong.
The prosecution claims that Oscar and Reeva argued that night. They say witnesses heard angry voices and screams. But even if it's proven that Oscar did kill Reeva in a fit of rage, that in itself might not constitute premeditated murder. A vibrant young life was lost. Reeva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old female, was shot dead. And the tragedy of that loss is beyond dispute. Since news broke of the tragic killing, people around the world have their own questions. The key one is, how did Oscar miss that Reeva was not in bed, that the bed was empty? Oscar woke in the small hours of Valentine's morning, went to his balcony to bring in a fan, then panicked when he heard a noise from his bathroom. He assumed Reeva was safely in bed. That assumption would have fatal consequences. Oscar says it was too dark to see anything. In his affidavit, he repeatedly uses the phrase pitch dark. Only he knows just how dark it was in his bedroom at 3 o'clock that morning. But is it possible that had Oscar stopped to look, even in the pitch dark, he might have seen that the bed was empty? Kathy Bridgens is an ophthalmologist specializing in how the retina processes light and darkness.
If I were to walk from a very dark room into a semi-dark patio or balcony, and then I were to walk back into the room, then you would have to have some form of dark adaptation. In an average suburban environment, you will be able to see something. You will see shapes. One must also remember that in the dark, one's pupils are also bigger, and that increases your ability to take in what very little light there is with at least 30%.
Even if Oscar's eyes could have made out shapes in the dark of his bedroom, that doesn't prove he did see the bed was empty and Reeva was not there. Oscar describes a sense of terror rushing over him when he heard a noise from his bathroom. Panic and fear can make us all blind to the obvious. Oscar assumed it was an intruder. He grabbed his gun, then rushed on his stumps to the bathroom. He shouted to Reeva to call the police. Seeing an open window, Oscar assumed the intruder was in the toilet. Horror, fear, grave danger. These are the words Oscar uses to describe his state of mind. And so he shot. Time and again. Shot after shot, after shot, after shot.
He cannot raise the defense, I was being attacked and I defended myself. He has to raise the defense was, I believed I was being attacked and I, in the circumstances, defended myself.
If Oscar genuinely believed he was in danger, his lawyers could claim putative self-defense.
Typical example of putative self-defense would be where, although a person shot and killed somebody where it was not legally justifiable, that person can explain to a court that they believed in the circumstances that there was a very real threat and that they had to respond to that threat in what they believed to be a reasonable and justifiable way. I might add, it's a very difficult defense to prove.
Even if Oscar were successful in his claim of putative self-defense, he could still be convicted of culpable homicide. That he did kill someone, but he genuinely thought his own life was in danger. It's a far lesser charge than premeditated murder. It was the statements made by neighbors, witnesses, which led the police to believe that Oscar might be guilty of murder. The indictment refers to witnesses who heard a woman scream, followed by moments of silence, then heard gunshots, and then more screaming. Oscar's own statement gives a different story. But people make mistakes. And people lie. Only one witness never lies. A silent witness. But one which can speak volumes. The truth of what happened in Oscar's apartment on Valentine's Day could lie not in people's words, but in the testimony of a silent witness.
The beauty of physical evidence is that it tells a story. It is objective, it cannot lie. We know that people edit their own stories. They tell you what they want you to know. They exaggerate, they have alternative motives why they tell stories. Objective evidence, on the other hand, is almost 100% reliable.
The physical evidence at the scene can tell the whole truth of what happened. Oscar knows that. In his affidavit, he says he's confident the objective facts will not refute my version, as it is the truth. But you have to know how to understand, how to decipher the truth you are being told by the physical evidence.
We look at the firearm, we look at the blood. There were cartridges left behind. Projectiles were found within the toilet. The toilet door, we know it was damaged by the rounds that was fired.
Oscar says he fired at the toilet door, then came back to the bedroom. When he saw that Reeva was not there, that's when he put on his prosthetic legs, ran back to the toilet and tried to break it down.
I also suspect that there were marks at the bottom of the door because, as Oscar said in his statement, he used his prosthesis to kick the door.
The toilet door is a crucial piece of the physical evidence. It carries the indelible marks of the fatal shots. how those shots were fired could support or undermine Oscar's version of events.
The eject direction and distance of the cartridge cases, the type of ammunition being used, the type of firearms being used, the trajectories through the door, the angles through the door, if the shots are grouped in a certain position, if they are fired randomly through the door, it will actually, a totality of all the ballistic aspects will play a role in this case.
The ballistics have another story to tell. Oscar says he fired the shots while he was standing on his stumps. He'd been too frantic to put on his prosthetic legs. On his stumps alone, Oscar stands 157 centimeters tall. On his prosthetic legs, Oscar stands 184 centimeters tall.
He walks around without his prosthesis, it's very low, and he fires shots through the door. So this will most likely determine if Oscar was on his prosthesis or not.
If Oscar had his prosthetic legs on, it would show that he lied about the moment he fired the shots. It would show that he'd had time to put them on. Crucial seconds indicating a calmer state of mind, not panic, and possible premeditation before the shooting. Just before Oscar's indictment, it was widely reported that a leaked ballistics report proved Oscar was on his stumps as the shots were fired. Word spread around the world like wildfire, as if this showed Oscar was telling the truth and was innocent of premeditated murder. Only when the ballistics report is presented in court will we know what it actually found. But there are some who believe the height of the shots on the toilet door won't actually help to reveal the height of the shooter.
Once we're dealing with the height of the firearm, shooters can use a different stance in shooting. Where I was in this position when I fired the shots in a standing position, meaning that I have my arms stretched out and my height is important, I could have well fired the same 5 shots. The difference is just I could have fired out of the hip, holding the firearm at this height.
More important than the height of the shots could be the distance from which they were fired at the door.
What I've done is I've fired with a normal 9mm parabellum, fired at 5, 10, 15, and 20 centimeters. This is what you would expect to find on the door, up to about 75 centimeters, a little bit less, give and take 10 or 20 centimeters. You will find powder residue on the door. So they most likely would have tested the door chemically, which will also indicate, in other words, the further you will go away, the powder residue will grow, or go bigger and less, but you will still have a concentric circle.
Were the fatal shots that killed Reeva fired by someone 157 centimeters tall or someone 184 centimeters tall? How far away from the door was the person firing the gun? The toilet door is not the only way to work out the angle and power of the bullets that killed Reeva. The post-mortem examination showed that Reeva was shot through her right hip, right elbow, and right temple. There was also a graze through the little finger of her left hand.
We don't know if she was standing up behind it all, if she was sitting down. We don't know. That's evidence that still needs to be led inside the court.
What you're seeing here on the right temple or the right temporal bone is a very neat, well circumscribed and distinct punched out circular defect that's typical of an entrance wound. But it must be remembered that this is a neat, stable bullet entry. If a bullet or bullets had passed through the door and had slowed down sufficiently or even fragmented, they would have struck to cause this kind of atypical, irregular defect. and I would expect for the bullet to have been found inside the skull or the brain.
In all shootings where bullets enter and leave a body and blood is spilled, clues are left by the way fluid splashes after an explosion.
Once you're dealing with bloodshed, the minute the projectiles created entrance wounds, you immediately from that second you have the back splatter towards the door, for instance. If she was close to the door, you'll have back splatter towards the direction the projectile have just penetrated the skin. But you'll have forward splatter if the projectile exits the skin. So you have this impact splatter. If the room is quite small, you'll find it on both, either on a door or in a wall next to the door, as well as the opposite wall.
In the direction
where the force was applied to.
of the transfer.
That's correct. This pattern here is an impact spatter pattern or stain pattern. And this pattern just tells you that the source was a little bit away from the wall, and it created a pattern right across the surface here.
The direction of the bullets, the distance from which they were fired, the splatter patterns of the blood after the shootings. These are some of the forensic details which can unveil what really happened in Oscar's bathroom, and whether he's telling the truth. There is further physical evidence which could contain vital clues. It was a hot summer's night. Reeva had been in bed. She was shot in the toilet. It's easy to make assumptions about why Reeva was up in the middle of the night. But forensic investigation is about testing all assumptions and going beyond them to hard fact.
The examination of the clothing would be crucial to determine whether or not that clothing was in that particular part of that body at that moment in time, because it would infer whether or not she was wearing that article or that garment, and help the court come to a decision as to, at the time of the shooting, was she fully or partially clothed, like it would be important to determine a body orientation and alignment and a position. Was she sitting in the toilet seat, or was she standing, was she turning, or exactly what she was doing?
The autopsy found Reeva's bladder empty.
We don't know whether the water inside the toilet bowl had been examined. I surely hope that it has.
It's an important piece of the puzzle to help establish the sequence of events in the small hours of Valentine's Day. But water can be a challenge in forensic investigation.
Testing the urine in the toilet bowl, I would think, would be probably less valuable or less helpful. And the reason for this is that apart from the dilution that you have in a toilet bowl, the amount of DNA, the DNA content in urine is very small.
We live today in an age when our every movement can be tracked, our every step monitored, even in the middle of the night, even in our most private spaces, our most private moments. A smartphone is a tracking device. Most people have one. Most people keep them close by. 4 were found in Oscar's bedroom and bathroom after the killing. He might have had others, but these 4 black box recorders could reveal why those 4 fateful shots were fired.
The cell phone forensics has picked up quite a lot in the last couple of years. With the newer smartphones, we can retrieve emails, documents, presentations, SMSs, your WhatsApps. Also from your photographs, in the background of your photographs, we can extract, for example, GPS coordinates, so we can place photographs. We can place persons where they move around. Because of the new type of smartphones, they're actually recording all those GPS coordinates. In this situation, data recovery will be very important because the investigation team will need to be aware of any potential evidence that could have been deleted or removed. For example, if there was SMS sent out that evening that somebody wanted to remove, that can be recovered. Or if there's evidence of internet activity or calls that was deleted, all of that information will be able to be recovered from the phones.
If Oscar Pistorius has lied about the events of Valentine's Day, the forensic evidence could pick apart his web of deception. If he's telling the truth, it will serve to confirm his story and explain his actions. One thing is certain. Oscar was in a state of high emotion when he fired those shots. Was it high passion, rage perhaps, between two lovers? Or was it terror of an intruder?
The court will test his behavior according to the standard of the ordinary reasonable person and see how far short of that standard he fell.
What we find with the research is that there's three ways of reacting to fear. The first way is fight, the second way is flight, and then the third way is freeze. Now, fight, of course, is going on confronting the intruder, the real or imagined intruder. Flight, of course, would be to get out of the place, to run away, to lock yourself up. And freeze would just be to do nothing about it.
Whether it was rage or fear, Oscar clearly felt vulnerable. Both rage and fear are reactions to feeling threatened, emotionally, physically, perhaps both at once. Could this, Oscar's overwhelming feeling of vulnerability, be a key to why he reacted so violently? Losing his legs could have made the young Oscar feel most vulnerable, immobile, reliant upon others, totally dependent. Trevor Brautman is the man who prevented Oscar's loss from becoming a burden. He created the legs that made it possible for Oscar to lead a normal life.
On Oscar's day-to-day prosthesis, he could basically do what any other able-bodied person can do. There's very little he couldn't do.
But Trevor also knows the impact on Oscar's state of mind if he wasn't wearing his prosthesis.
Oscar feeling vulnerable on his stumps, I think very much so, because instead of looking down at situations, he's suddenly a lot shorter a person. Mobility-wise, he's not as fast, so he cannot run away, run downstairs.
Being vulnerable doesn't mean you have to back up. You can feel vulnerable, and if you have the personality type of going into situations and confronting it and dealing with it, so it feels very consistent to me that if he felt vulnerable, he would have done what's in his personality, which is then to address the issue.
If, as a disabled person, he felt more vulnerable than another person, that would go towards him being able to establish a very real fear on his part, which negatives his intention to confirm his belief that he was the subject of a vicious attack which he needed to defend himself. In other words, an able-bodied person may be judged according to a higher standard and would not be as fearful as a disabled person.
That Oscar felt himself vulnerable is also indicated by the extremely high level of security protecting his home. Electric fences, guard dogs, alarms, cameras. A wealthy, good-looking global celebrity, Oscar knew he could be a prime target. He already had been. He says he's experienced death threats and been the victim of violence and burglaries. In fact, it's said a sense of ever-present danger in South Africa has altered the national psyche.
South Africans are, as a rule, living with a huge degree of PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder means that we've all been exposed to or watched or heard, or a family member of ours have been exposed to some violent crime.
With his high, perhaps excessive sense of vulnerability, and if he felt genuinely under threat, Oscar's reaction on Valentine's Day, however violent, might be explicable. It's one line the defense could take. That far from being a murderer, Oscar is no different from any other young man.
Young men between 18 and 25 have the highest accident rate. They have the highest rate of being able to be murdered during that time, highest rate of drug use and abuse during that time. Is he a higher risk than other people? I doubt it.
He might have an aggressive side, as do I and any other guy. But to do that is it's just taking something to another level. So, yeah, I truly do believe that he was trying to defend Reeva.
The prosecution would, of course, argue differently. They believe Oscar has a propensity for aggressive behavior. And so they've added to the indictment 2 further gun-related charges alleging that Oscar recklessly fired a gun in public. They will strive to prove that Oscar Pistorius is unlike other young men. That he is, in fact, a killer. A killer who cannot be believed.
You don't go towards danger, you go away from danger. You seek to protect those that you think that you have an obligation to protect. There's no evidence at this stage that Pistorius took any steps to ascertain where his partner was, to protect and preserve the 2 of them.
I have difficulty in appreciating why the accused would not seek to ascertain who exactly was in the toilet. I have a problem also as to why the accused would further venture into danger, knowing full well that the intruder was in the toilet.
Under requirements for the use of lethal force, everybody that goes through accredited firearm training is then exposed to when they can use the firearm and when they can't use the firearm.
When one deals with murder, one deals with intent, direct intent to kill another person. When one deals with culpable homicide, we deal with a negligent action that caused the death of the individual. The moral blameworthiness differs extensively. And in this instance, there is no doubt in my mind that I would approach the state with a suggestion to a plea and sentence agreement on culpable homicide, in that I overstepped the bounds of my putative private defense.
The evening of February the 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. Reeva drives into Silverwood's estate. In her car, she has the Valentine's gift she's chosen for Oscar and carefully gift-wrapped. Their relationship is barely 3 months old. Anticipation and passion must have been high. Like lovers all over the world, Reeva hopes for a perfect evening with her partner. A world-famous athlete, superstar, an icon to generations across the globe. For his part, Oscar too anticipates the evening with Reeva. Just the 2 of them, alone, safe, at home. 10 hours later, in the still of the night, their world would turn upside down.
He's really feeling pain because you can actually see him when you're with him, and you see his whole body and expression when he starts to think about Reeva, that he changes and tries to strengthen up and bring himself back to reality. So someone that's really suffering from a traumatic incident for him, and something he probably wishes would never happen. He is trying to defend someone he loved.
Oscar will always be Oscar, but I don't ever think he can be the same person. He will always have that little bit inside in that little man in his head and in his heart, niggling away and chipping away at his emotions all the time about what had taken place.